Hey leader, and welcome to episode number 310 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritong Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel as well, so make sure you're subscribed there. And if you've been listening to us for a while and the podcast has made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, in today's episode of the podcast, you'll hear my conversation with my good friend, Tim Dumas. Tim is actually someone who reached out to me a few years ago. He had listened to the podcast and he wanted me to come in and speak to his organization. And so I was able to do that. And through that connection, we've become great friends, and he's become a coach and a friend and a mentor in my life. And he's added massive value to my life over the last 3 years. And so I thought we have to have him on the podcast to add value to you. And so let me tell you a little bit about Tim. Tim's the president of Service Leadership. He's also a forum chair for MacKay CEO Forums, a board member with the Virtuous Leadership Institute of North America, and he's a partner and the COO of his family business, Jack's Beer, Wine, and Spirits. He's also a coach, a teacher, and a speaker, and I would just tell you that he's phenomenal at all three of those and everything that he does. He also has 6 kids, and so you'll hear us talk about family as well. But in the interview, we talk a lot about coaching. Tim coaches people. He also has been coached, and so if you've ever wanted to get a professional coach in your life, you're going to love this episode. If you are a coach, you're going to love this episode. We also talk about speaking and networking and business, and obviously I take him through the lightning round as well. So he's going to add massive value to your life, so get ready for that. But before we dive in, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baritong Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritong Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritong Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritongadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritong Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings at Henny, and we just loved our experience. Not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in and gets engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for their marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, here's my conversation with Tim Dumas. Well, hey, Tim, it's such an honor to finally get to do this. I know we've been talking about this probably for years at this point, but it's been a joy to watch your leadership journey over the past few years, and I can't wait to introduce you to our whole L3 community. And the first thing I really want to dive into with you is just to talk about coaching. You do a lot of professional coaching yourself, but you've also been impacted by coaching. Can you talk about the impact that coaching has had on you before we get into how you impact others?
You bet, Doug. I wish that I knew about coaching earlier in my leadership journey or earlier in my career. I got into leadership and started managing in the business world about 18 years ago now. And at that time, when I got into business, I was told, Tim, put your head down and work as hard as you possibly can, and good things will happen. And certainly working hard is part of it. But I never came up to breathe for pretty much the better part of a decade. And if I would have only come up to breathe and seen the world of coaching, been more intentional about the people I met and more intentional about the things that I did, I would have grown so much earlier. That being said, every part of life and every failure is a journey on the path to success. And I was so lucky to have met a great coach and brought a coach into my company and my life almost 7 years ago now. And it was game-changing, both in my business life and in my personal life.
Yeah, can you talk about specifically how that impacted you? You know, what was the investment? Were you hesitant? And then, how long did it take to make an impact? Tell me that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hesitant. I had been brought up by bosses, by people that I'd worked with, saying, why do you need to go outside of your company to learn something? You got all you need here. You have mentors here. You have a boss. You have other mentors that you can learn from. Why would you need to go outside? And people ask me this all the time now. They say, Tim, why should I hire you as a coach if you don't have any expertise in my industry? And the answer to that is I'm an even better coach outside of my industry than I am inside. Because inside my industry, the things that I know really well, I have at least the tiniest bit of bias into things that I know have worked and haven't worked. When I work with people and coach people outside of my industry, I ask better questions to help them bring their version of success outside of themselves. And so that's really the value of coaching. One of the greatest coaching sessions I ever had with my coach, and this was my aha moment, was we were working through some both business and personal, and I would call them time mastery aspects of my calendar. And he said, Tim, what are the most important things in your life? And I said, it's simple. My faith is the most important thing in my life. My family is the second most important. And then after that, it's my profession, my career. And he said, great. Can you open your calendar for me? I said, yeah. I opened my calendar. He said, can you show me on your calendar where you're taking care of your faith, your relationship with God? Doug, I am embarrassed to tell you, there was not one thing on my calendar that helped me get closer to God. Wow. And he said, okay, Tim, at least show me the things on your calendar with respect to your family. Doug, once again, there was things like coach soccer practice and things that I had to be at. But I realized that day that both God and my family were getting the scraps of my life. I would put in work meetings because those are the things I had to be at. Those were people that were pulling at my strings for me to be at certain places. But I realized that the most important things in my life were getting the scraps. And so that day, I've been on a journey since that day to reinvigorate my calendar, to put the most important things first. And that's a journey that I'm currently on with respect to coaching.
Yeah. And have you continued to invest in coaching in your life and business?
Yeah, you can't give what you don't have. So, I would argue that everyone in the world needs some kind of coach, right? Leadership, as you know, takes three types, right? We can train someone by telling them what to do. We can mentor them by drawing on our past experience, or we can coach them by asking them the questions to help them draw that out of themselves. And you know what's funny? When we get into either a tough spot or just a spot in everyday life, we get into habits. And many of our habits are really, really good and help us get to the next level. But some of our habits, we don't realize that they're blocking us from getting to where we want to be in our version of success. And really, that's what coaching is. Coaching is asking those questions to say, why are you doing that? How is that helping you get to what your goals and dreams are? So I anticipate that I will be coached for the rest of my days on this earth. And I hope that I get to coach people for the rest of my days on this earth. Yeah.
So we talked about the importance of coaching, and I'm just curious, it seems like we live in a culture in a world where there's literally millions of life coaches. I feel like all you have to do is put I'm a life coach on your, Instagram profile, and you're a life coach. That's all it takes. And so while I agree that everyone needs coaching, talk to us about finding the right coach. How do you actually, it seems like similar to the therapist, there's so many, you can just get overwhelmed by the amount of choices. And how do you know who can actually help and who can't? Do you have any advice for people who want to get coached, just don't know where to look?
Yeah, I think it's important, just like anything, to meet people. And there's two parts of coaching that one would look for when they're looking to find a coach. Number one, there has to be some kind of connection and shared experience and shared goals to get to where they want to be. So, for example, for me, I work best with people who are business executives and entrepreneurs that are intimate. Their intimate goals are to become not only a great executive, not only to become a great entrepreneur, but to become a great person, to become a great person for their family, husband, wife, brother, sister, father, mother, etc., etc. And if that person has those types of goals and dreams, that would be an ideal person that I would get to work with. So first of all, someone that you connect with on that type of level. The second thing would be, as I mentioned before, is sometimes it's really good to get somebody outside of your industry that can ask different, more poignant questions. So those are two things that might sound somewhat contradictory, but if you're able to find somebody in each of those categories, that might be the perfect coach for you.
Yeah. And I want to talk, there's also, we're on a leadership podcast. There's lots of people who probably are life coaches or would like to be a life coach. Let's talk about that side of the business. What have you learned about becoming a coach, and what would you tell people who want to become one?
Well, number one, I think a lot about Dr. Ivan Misner, the founder of BNI, and he recently wrote a book called Who's in Your Room? And really, for people that want to become a life coach or want to become anything for that matter, start hanging out with other people that are doing that thing. One of the biggest catapults that catapulted me into coaching in my career is just over 3 years ago. I joined an organization that you're familiar with called MacKay CEO Forums. It's similar to an organization called Vistage. We do professional development mastermind groups for business owners and executives. And what I found with that is I got to hang out with other great coaches that were in my organization. And almost by osmosis, just by hanging out with those people, you start to learn things, right? Just like if you want to be a great basketball player, you're going to go to the place where other basketball players go. So finding a mastermind group, finding a networking group of people that are where you want to be or are going where you want to be is the number one thing that those people can do to become a life coach or whatever their goal is.
Yeah. How important was it? One thing I admire about you is you're not just a coach, but you also, lead at your business. You're the chief operating officer at your wine and spirits store. How important is it that you actually have experience, in leadership or in life really to be able to add value to people? Have you found that to be useful or a requirement, or can people just with no experience just go out and coach?
Yeah. If there's one thing I've learned, Doug, it's to never say never. However, having experience in anything is always valuable. There's some people that have reached out to me and said, Tim, I'm just getting in my career. I want to be a coach. And while I think that that's outstanding, and I think they can certainly do that, there are some aspects that may be valuable in living through that as a business executive, as a business owner first, before coaching through it. It's helped me give me a perspective to really understand the failures and how the failures can lead me to successes. 18 years ago, when I first got into a management role, I would have never dreamed of the types of failures I would have had. But I realize also that those failures all set me up for the path to where I am today. So certainly having many of those experiences is invaluable. It's not 100% a prerequisite, but it's also extremely valuable.
Yeah. And also with coaching, we talked about, one, it's an investment. So I want to talk about pricing and then charging from both ends of the spectrum. So one, on the paying for coaching part, if someone reaches out to a coach, it's usually what can seem like an overwhelming price to someone. What would you say to someone who would just say, I don't know if it would be worth the investment of whatever the price the coach is charging?
Well, first of all, it's do it and see. Go have a complimentary session with a coach. I offer this to people that I meet. They're like, Tim, I just don't know, how will it be valuable? Well, there's one way to find out, and that's to start going through sessions. And I know how incredibly valuable that is. So I know those people will find value in that, number one. But then number two, one of the first questions that I would ask in a coaching session is, after a quarter, 3 months from now, what does success look like? And then we're going to work towards that with everything that we got. So identifying that right away. If your investment is X, what do you need to see? So I also know what their goals are and what their, maybe there's a revenue target they're shooting towards. Maybe there's a new job they're shooting towards. So then that's what we're going to focus on for that quarter. So I would encourage you, if you're looking for coaching and not sure if that investment's right for you, certainly I'd be more than happy to give you your first complimentary session. And I would argue that many other coaches would as well.
Yeah. And then on the business of coaching as well, what have you learned about charging and setting your prices as a business owner?
Yes, setting your price, that's probably the biggest question that everybody has, not only getting into coaching, but getting into any business. What should the price be? So what I found to be valuable, and certainly earlier in my coaching career, was certainly being in that room with other coaches helps to understand that, right? Asking other people what they're charging, firstly. But secondly, I always had in my mind what my rate is, and also what I was willing to work for. And so at the beginning, I would always set my rate at the same level, but I would be willing to do it for a little bit less at the beginning because I needed to start, cutting my teeth in the coaching industry. So people who are just getting into it, I would recommend to look for clients that even are maybe even free or very low paid initially, knowing that always set your value though. Always say, my value is this, my price is this, but because of who you are, I'm willing to do it for a lesser price. And always having that in your repertoire. So for me, for example, I always have about 3 people that I'm coaching pro bono. Sometimes it ends up being an extra one, sometimes one less, but I always look to give back to those people because there were people that gave back to me at the beginning. So one of the aspects of coaching is always give back. And then that is going to help you cut your chops to get to the next level and to be where you're actually coaching all the time for the investment that you desire.
And I just out of curiosity, what have you found to be a good cadence for a coaching relationship? Once a month, twice a month, once a week? What works for people?
Yeah, I've seen anywhere from once a week to once a month, but the best cadence that I've seen is the biweekly, every second week. So the majority of people that I coach, this is what it looks like. It looks like a 45-minute session every second week with a quarter day session every quarter. So that's the big strategic planning, setting goals for the quarter. And usually that lasts about 2 hours. So that seems to be a great rhythm. The other thing about coaching that some people forget about is they charge by the session. I charge by the quarter. If you're to work with me, you can work weekly, monthly, biweekly. 80% of the people work biweekly, but you also have access anytime you need it during that quarter as well. So we'll have official sessions biweekly, but when you need me, you send me a text, you give me a call. You say, "Hey Tim, do you have 15 minutes today or tomorrow? Can we have a quick session on this issue I want to work through?" And so once we get into the coaching process, I'm all in for you to achieve your goals and dreams, and you are as well.
Anything else you would throw out there about coaching before we move on to another topic?
There's so much, Doug, about coaching. I would just say it doesn't matter your state in life, whether you think you're in a position of leadership or not, whether you think you're in a business that requires coaching or not. I don't know anyone that wouldn't receive value from coaching. So if you're on the fence about it, certainly reach out to me or reach out to a coach to at least investigate that, to see the difference that can make in your life. Because in my life, it's been one of the great game changers in my life.
Yeah, I want to talk about mastermind groups as well. You talked about you lead the MacKay Forums. It's the same principle of just who's in your room, who are you getting together with on a consistent basis. You talked a little bit about this earlier, but can you just talk about the importance? We talked about one-on-one coaching, but why is it also important that you have a community of leaders that you surround yourself with on a consistent basis to do life with and to hold you accountable? What have you seen in your experience? Yeah,
certainly the MacKay Forums, in my experience, and I know with your L3 leadership forums, your mastermind groups, Doug, it's very much the same thing. When you're surrounding yourself with people that have similar goals, dreams, values, have similar definitions of success, you end up sharing ideas. And the one thing we get into in our everyday lives, we're highly scheduled. We go to work, we get the job done, and sometimes we don't take a step back to think, how can we do this better? And how can we actually get to that ultimate goal or dream, both in our organization and personally? And what these mastermind groups do is it takes you out of your head, out of your regular daily life for a day, a half a day, or a quarter a day, depending what type of mastermind group you're in, and helps you look at the bigger picture. it helps you. A mastermind group generally has people from all different industries. And one of the greatest things I've learned is from industries I never thought that I could learn from. Somebody who does things completely differently. And I start thinking about, why don't I do that way in my business? And when we start thinking creatively like that, that's when great things happen. And that's where we get to the next level. It's really stepping back to grow.
Yeah. And, and your experience leading these, my favorite thing about mastermind groups is the stories, right? Of people coming in and they wanted to accomplish X, and then, something else completely different happens, but changes their life forever. And you hear that story. I'm just curious, what patterns have you seen in life change once people actually put themselves in a group like this?
Well, it's amazing because you talked about stories, Doug, and in MacKay, we talk about the term shared experience. So when we get into a mastermind session, a group session, we work really hard not to give advice, but we share experiences. And when we have, approximately 12 people in the room, when somebody comes with an issue, challenge, or opportunity in their life or in their business, there's almost certainly somebody that has shared a similar opportunity. And when we share stories and we share experiences, we learn from that. And the other great thing from that is we're not telling somebody what to do. They're taking all that in and they're making that decision for themselves on what I should do based upon that story or what I shouldn't do based upon that story. And that's where the real growth happens, because we then bring that into not just our conscious mind, but our subconscious mind. And then we actually put that into practice and we actually process it differently, rather than somebody just telling me, Tim, if you want to be successful at business or life, you should do this. Well, my brain doesn't actually process that. I just move like a robot and do that. When I get into mastermind sessions and I hear stories, it helps me process that and make that decision for myself. And that's when I truly learn. And that's why there's so many great learnings from mastermind sessions. If there's one thing that I've seen that has been the greatest learning from mastermind sessions, it's one that almost every leader struggles with. And it's what they would call time management, or I might call time mastery. Everybody, or so many people, struggle with their time. And when we share experiences of how we schedule our time, how we utilize our time, great things really happen. And when we get in a mastermind group with people who are going through the same thing, we realize we're not alone. Because often as an executive in a business, we're somewhat alone, right? We might be the CEO, and there might not be other people that we can lean on. In a mastermind group, you can be vulnerable, and you can, and that's where really great growth can come, and creativity, when you're vulnerable with that group and share those issues, to share those experiences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And speaking of time mastery, I do want to dive into this a little bit. I didn't know that story about your coach saying, hey, where is your faith on your calendar? Where is your family on your calendar? But one thing I've been impressed by in knowing you for as long as I have is, one, you have 6 kids. So if I didn't say that in the bio, Tim has 6 kids, and he's the chief operating officer at his wine store, and he's doing mastermind or MacKay forum groups, and he's coaching, and he's doing public speaking. What have you learned about managing your time? You say every executive manages it. What do we need to know? What are your best tips?
Well, that was certainly the first tip, is think about what's the most important first and block out your calendar that way. And that was game changing for me, where I could actually block out middle of the afternoon to pick my kids up from school once a week, or to drop them off at school once a week. And I was lucky enough on my calendar that I could then work different hours at different times. But that really brought to my life a level of satisfaction of really what I wanted to do. Number one. And number two, what I didn't realize before is sometimes people think, and I thought, if I overschedule my life, it'll be kind of like a cross that I have to bear. It won't be invigorating. But what I found is, when I know in my calendar that I have a break at 11 a.m. to go do exercise, I look forward to that. When I didn't schedule well, I often wouldn't get exercise, or there was other things in my life that would fall to the wayside because I wasn't highly scheduled. When I know at 11 a.m. I have a break, and that's my break to get some exercise, or else I'm not doing it that day, I get more effective at the other things I do in my life. It also forces me to be more effective in the short time I have for all of my other tasks. So what the ironic thing is, there's the mantra that says, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. And there's a reason for that, is because they have no choice but to get those things done at those times, and they become highly effective at utilizing some of the small time that they have.
And with managing your family, I think another thing that, people who are leaders struggle with, especially if they have families, is work-life balance and, trying to keep their family and lead their family while also leading well at work. With 6 kids, what have you learned about leading your family well so you don't miss out on your family while you're pursuing all these other things?
You bet. It's continually a work in process, but there was one quarter where I was working with my coach a couple of years ago. And I said, Coach, I want to be a better husband and father this quarter. I really want to focus on that. My coach said, great, Tim. And there was a pause. We both said nothing back. He goes, Tim, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to try to be a better husband and father. He goes, no, Tim, what are you going to do? And I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. He said, Tim, at the end of the quarter, how are you going to know if you're better or worse, if you've succeeded? Because every day of your life, you are going to get better or worse at your chosen craft as a husband, father, brother, mother, sister, cousin, colleague, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't make that choice every morning, and if you don't make that choice of understanding completely what you need to do, you might as well go buy lottery tickets, because your chances are better of winning the lottery than becoming that better husband or father that you want to do. So we brainstormed for a while, and we came up with this. We said, well, you know what? I know I will get closer to being the husband or father I want if I make sure with the 6 kids and my wife that I have one-on-one time with them at least one time this quarter. And that's 7 times. So that's, almost one a week. And if you could imagine in a group of, with 6 kids driving to hockey practice and football practice and soccer practice and dance lessons, there's not always that much time. But what I found was I found ways to spend that one-on-one time that I never would have thought before. It was driving one of our kids home from when we had one-on-one time from soccer and just stopping to get some ice cream. It was, this just happened this weekend, where I have 2 boys who are 14 and 13, and they like going to the gym to work out. They play high school football now. And they said, hey, Dad, we're going to the gym to work out. And I thought, this would be a good opportunity to spend some one-on-one time with them. So I put my shorts on, my T-shirt on. I went to the gym with them. Doug, I'm not quite as strong as I used to be. I came home.
Better shape than you, yeah.
So they were impressed when I got to the gym. Like, oh, Dad's doing some squats and power cleans. This is awesome. Problem was, I got home, and my wife looks at me. She goes, what's wrong with you? You're limping around the house. I go, well, I haven't done power cleans in a while. I did them to show the boys how to do it. And I'm kind of sore. She said, I have no sympathy for you after doing that. But what that had was, we now have that little time of connection. And it was only because I was continually looking for ways that I could spend one-on-one time, or in this case, me with the 2 of them, and just get to hang out and talk about anything, right? And that's certainly taken me to become a better husband and father, and it's helped me to continue to look for ways to be that better husband and father.
Such good advice. I love that. Before we go into the lightning round, the other area that you do that we didn't talk much about was public speaking. And I also want to talk to you about networking. So if I forget, remind me. But public speaking. So you also speak. And I know a lot of people listening to this podcast aspire to be, a conference speaker, et cetera. What have you learned about the speaking business? What do we need to know?
Well, it's similar to the coaching business. And as far as I started becoming a better speaker when I got a speaking coach. So as I was, I was talking to you earlier today, this quarter I'm doing 14 speaking gigs. So a little bit more than one a month. And I meet with my speaking coach once a month, and we go through some of the speeches that I'm going to give that quarter. And what I realized was I was preparing for them, but I really didn't have that professional expertise that my speaking coach can now give me. So Anytime, as we talked about with coaching, someone wants to be to grow to the next level in any profession, hang out with people who've done it. So I started hanging out with other speakers, and I got a speaking coach. And if there's any two pieces of advice that she gave me in becoming a great speaker, it was these two things. In every speech, utilize stories as much as humanly possible. And even in our chat today, Doug, we've tried to talk about stories because people remember stories. There's a reason why we tell our children stories. They remember what they hear in stories, number one. And number two, to always focus on you-focused language. And by you, I mean you being the audience. What are they needing, and what will impact them? It's not about me, it's what will impact them. So those are the greatest tips on getting out there and speaking. And if you'd like, I'll jump into that networking part, because that's really how I get speaking gigs. I have a goal with my coach to meet 5 new people a week. So on average, 1 person per weekday. And there's some quarters I get close, but every quarter I'm in somewhere between 40 and 60 new people. And it's simply by reaching out. And Doug, I learned a lot of this from you, and I'm very grateful to our relationship we've had, because you've rubbed off a lot on me. And it's just asking people, saying, I know when 2 great people get together, great things happen. And I have no idea what's going to happen here. Maybe I'll be the right coach for you. Maybe you'll like me to speak. Maybe there's some way that you can impact me or other people in my network. But I've never met a bad connection. And I have a little quote as it relates to networking, Doug. I hope I can read it quickly. It's from
quotes.
A book.
Let's go.
Okay, here we go. It's from a book called The Power of Magnanimity by Alex Havard. And he's speaking about Pope John Paul II. And he said this: he needed something personal from everyone he met. He looked at people with such interest and hope, as if to say, what wonderful things will you help me discover today? And what will you give me? And so when I think about Pope John Paul II, one of the greatest, not just spiritual leaders, greatest leaders of his time, he went into every interaction saying, what can I learn from them? And normally I would think I'd learn something from him. He wouldn't learn something from me. But if we go into every interaction with that, we can't help but to learn something. I learned this about 8 years ago when I got a call from a business contact I had and said, Tim, I want you to meet this person. I think she'll be game-changing in your business and in your life. This person happened to be an artist. She painted pictures. She made greeting cards and sold them. And I said, I really appreciate the connection, but I'm not in the greeting card business. I'm not really an arts. I don't really put a lot of art on my walls. Why would you ever think that this would be a good connection? And he shook his head at me and said, Tim, when you go into every interaction, realize you can learn something great from every person. It doesn't matter who that person is. You will get what you're looking for. And I went into that interaction. This person has become one of the greatest connectors that I'd ever met. And I learned so much from this person. Someone who I originally, because of my own, I would say at the time, dumb ego, that I didn't think I could learn from. But when I went in with an open mind, I've gone into every interaction with that since then. I've learned and had great connections with so many people.
So good. When you're networking, and I'm even just thinking through this, so, you also have the courage to ask. So, when we talk about speaking, we'll just use speaking gigs as an example. Do you just cold reach out to people and say, hey, I saw you run events. Can I speak at your events? Like, what is your strategy there? And was that hard for you to have the courage to do that? I'm just curious what that process looks like.
Well, yes. Number one, it's always hard to have the courage, but once you get in the habit of it, it becomes second nature, right? And the thought that really changed things for me was, I don't have a relationship with this person today. If they don't want to meet me, I'm not going to have a relationship with them tomorrow either. So I'm neither any further ahead nor behind from what I was today. But there's a small chance that person's going to reach out and something amazing is going to happen. So I got nothing to lose. When you and I first reached out to each other, Doug, and if you didn't get back to me, I had nothing to lose. I didn't know you before that, and I wouldn't know you after. But when you and I met, something amazing happen, and we've had an amazing relationship since. I've learned so much from that. That's the first part. The second part is I try to never go into an interaction trying to sell something. I only go in with the question of, how can I add value to you or people in your network? Do you know anyone that I should know? And is there any way I can add value to you? And that may be paid, that may be unpaid. But when we come from that perspective of service, people want to work with people that are willing to serve them. And I'm not even thinking about a gig at that time, a business relationship. In some cases that happens, in some cases it doesn't. But I know when I come from a place of service and always adding value first and showing love and care to that person initially, that's the type of person generally they want to work with. And it normally works out well.
Oh, and this is so huge, Tim, and you're the perfect example. Because personally, I literally get emails every single day of people saying, I want to be on the podcast, or you need to have this. And literally, I just hit delete. Like, it actually irritates me when people think they could just like reach out and just. Anyway, it just drives me crazy. In general, I want to be the person inviting who I want on. But with you instantly, I don't even remember what the initial contact point was. I actually think you may have had me speak for you, but you reached out to me, you added value to my life, and I think we've met 3 or 4 times. And, because of you, we have our executive assistant, Ashley, who's unbelievable. I know she's your EA as well. Thank you, Ashley. If you're listening to this, you're amazing. But you had me speak to your organization. And then eventually there was an ask of, hey, and you didn't even ask to be on the podcast. You just said, hey, if there's ever an opportunity for me to be on the podcast or do anything to conserve your community, let me know. And here we are today recording the podcast. And so I'm absolutely with you. And it's absolutely huge to add value to people before you ever hope to sell anything. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I think we forget about the end game sometimes, Doug, and we think that it's a long game, right? You and I have known each other for more than 3 years now, right? And I didn't come into the relationship saying, "Hey, I want to be on the podcast," or I want you for this, or you want me for that. We just came saying, we think there's 2 great people in this room, and great things happen when great people meet. And if that's ever valuable for you, for me to be on the podcast, and you've come to speak to a few groups. Both my MacKay group and my leadership group at Jack's Beer, Wine, and Spirits. So hopefully I've added some value to you, because I know you've added a ton of value to me.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to talk to leaders about before we dive into the famous lightning round?
Well, I'll leave it with this. You know what's really funny, Doug, is when we talk about leadership, everyone knows about what we're talking about. But when I ask people to define leadership, they struggle to completely understand and how to define it. And so I went on this journey trying to find the greatest definition of leadership. And I went and I looked in Merriam-Webster dictionary online, right? Like a good kid of the 80s, you go look in the dictionary. Do you know what the definition of leadership is in the dictionary? It's the act of being a leader. And if I ever defined that on my grade 3 spelling test on what the definition of the word was, I would fail. How does the dictionary define something by the root of that word? That's a side note. So I went on this journey, and it wasn't until a few years ago, I just quoted his book, where I met a gentleman named Alex Havard. And I asked him that question. I said, I'm in search of the greatest definition of leadership. And he said, Tim, I think I might have it for you. And I said, great, what is it? He said, it's the word magnanimity. And when he said it, I thought he was speaking in a different language. I had no idea. I couldn't even say. I was like, Magna, what? He said, magnanimity. He said, the definition and the root of magnanimity is firstly generosity. But he said, I would define it in the leadership sense as this: the spirit of striving for greatness by bringing out the greatness in others.
Come on. And
I've never heard leadership defined that way, because in leadership, you have to focus on others. But unless you're striving for that yourself and putting your oxygen mask on first, you cannot help bring that to others. You can't give what you don't have. So that was the definition, the spirit of striving for greatness by bringing out the greatness of others, that really helped me to understand what my mission in life was and how to lead people.
Well, listeners, you just heard it here first. The world's greatest Definition of Leadership by Tim Dumas. Thank you so much, man. That's awesome. So let's dive into the lightning round. A bunch of fun questions I love to ask leaders. And the first one is, what is the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
What's the best advice I ever received? If I can turn that just quickly, I'll give you the best question I was ever asked. And that was by Nancy MacKay, the founder of MacKay CEO Forums. She asked me, she said, Tim, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you achieve? And I'd never heard that question asked before. I've heard it asked, what are your goals? What would you like to achieve? But I'd never heard the question, if you knew you couldn't fail. And that was the greatest question to ask. And it turned into the best advice because I started dreaming audaciously. I started saying things like, well, if I know I couldn't fail, I would write a book. If I knew I couldn't fail, I would meet Doug Smith. I would do all these things, right? And so that was the greatest question / piece of advice I've ever had.
If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
Love unconditionally, serve generously, dream audaciously, and grow purposefully. So once again, love unconditionally, serve generously, dream audaciously, to grow purposefully.
Best purchase in the last year for $100 or less?
Best purchase. I've purchased some books by Andy Andrews in the last year, and I know you're somewhat familiar with him. Mm-hmm. He has a great book called The Noticer and another book called the Traveler's Summit. And in the Traveler's Summit, he has probably the greatest leadership poem that I've ever read, and he calls it the Personal Declaration. So if you're ever able, if anyone listening is ever able to purchase that book, The Traveler's Summit by Andy Andrews, look up his Personal Declaration poem.
Yeah, it may be the same answer, but I see a huge bookshelf behind you. Do you have a favorite book or two that's made an impact on your life or that you give away most often?
Yeah, I've certainly mentioned some of them today, but the other one we haven't mentioned is one by Steve Farber called Love is Just Damn Good Business. And that really, we talked about that quote, I would say, and that the first part of that is love unconditionally. And in the workplace, we generally shy away from the word love, because if I were to say to you, Doug, or if I were to say to anyone else in the workplace, I love you, generally I'm getting a call from HR within 30 seconds saying there's a problem with Tim. However, the Harvard Business Review said that when people feel they're cared about in an organization, they do 90% better. They achieve 90% more, which is shocking.
Yeah. It's
not shocking to anybody. So, but why are we so afraid to say we're going to love, care, and support the people beside us? Not in a, in a brother sister way, in a way that I got your back. Would that not be the kind of organization you want to be in? And that was a great thing taught to me by Steve Farber, who's now a mentor of mine, who wrote the book, Love is Just Damn Good Business.
Yeah, I don't know if this is original to me, but I'll take credit for it. So at work, it's become more of an inside joke, but I'll tell my team I love them, and then I put in parentheses in a coworker kind of way. So I'm hoping that saves me from any HR issues, but they all know they're loved in a coworker kind of way. That's been helpful.
The other way you can do it, Doug, is you can look at C.S. Lewis's 4 Loves, right? And he talks about filial love, which is love between cousins, brother, sister, friends. And then he talks about agape love, which is that unconditional love, which is completely different than what we think of when we think of love. We think of eros, or the Greek word erotic love, and that's completely not what it is. If we showed up with that unconditional agape love with everybody we meet in our organization or outside, imagine what type of world and what kind of organization we would live and work in.
You're going deep, Tim. This is awesome. I know you listen to podcasts. Do you have a favorite 2 or 3 podcasts that you'd share?
I just listened to the L3 Leadership Podcast, Doug, none others. Just kidding.
Now I know
seriously,
where our 1 subscriber comes from. Yeah.
One of the reasons that you and I met was I had a guy who I work with show up one day, and we would pass off leadership books and podcasts. He goes, Tim, you got to listen to this guy, Doug Smith. And that's how I originally met you. So certainly that one. Other ones that you and I have talked about that I've listened to that I find really valuable is the John Gordon podcast is incredibly valuable. Steve Farber's Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. Many of these people you've had on your podcast, Jesse Cole from the Savannah Bananas,
yes.
He found a way to make work fun. And that was also a game changer in my life. If you ever come to a meeting with me, there's always something fun. You never know what's going to happen that happens, whether it's, a chocolate on your seat, whether it's, a lei ready to put around your head, whether it's a DJ in the room, whether it's a piñata that we pull up, maybe we do a karaoke dance off in the middle of the session. And so always finding ways to make things fun, because guess what happens when people have fun at work or in a meeting? People are more creative and do better work, which is not shocking. Yet we all walk into business meetings with our head down, like we're walking into a funeral or a morgue, get our coffee, sit down, listen to the CFO talk about finance, and go back to sleep. But what would happen if it was someplace we wanted to be? We were going to have fun. There was going to be a disco dance off in the middle of the session. When we cut the CFO off and say, great, you're halfway through your session. We're going to sing Don't Stop Believing by Journey. Well, everybody gets up. All of a sudden, they start listening to CFO after because they're awake again. So those are some of the types of things. And so that's another great podcast. And that's a great learning I've had from Jesse Cole.
I can't wait to see my team's face in our next meeting when I say, all right, we're going to break out into disco dance. Let's go.
I'll send you the name of our DJ. Doug, if you have a business meeting and you don't have a DJ, there's a problem.
I'm jealous already. What's your biggest leadership pet peeve?
My biggest leadership pet peeve. It's giving advice before asking questions. People often jump in and try and solve a problem before asking questions to help you bring that out of yourself. And that's really the coaching process.
What's something you've crossed off your bucket list that you believe everyone should experience in their lifetime?
Wow, that's a good one. Being on the L3 Leadership Podcast is certainly one. But my biggest bucket list that I'm working on right now is originally 3 years ago was to take my family to Disneyland. We did that 3 years ago. And our next goal for our family vacation is next summer to go to Portugal to take all our kids to World Youth Day, where the Pope comes and there's a big celebration of close to 1 million youth. And that's one of my goals and dreams in life that hopefully I'm about to cross off my bucket list.
Yeah, and I don't often answer my own lightning round questions, but Tim, you live in Vancouver, which my wife and I had the privilege of visiting a few years ago. That is a bucket list city. I would live there in a heartbeat. And I would just say it's on our bucket list to bring our kids there at some point and take them up to Whistler and do the whole thing we did. It was just, we love the city you live in. So let's go Canada.
Doug, will you have a host here as soon as you come to Vancouver? And you have 6, and your kids have 6 kids to play with.
Awesome, man. Awesome. As we wrap up, let's see. If you could go back and have coffee with 20-year-old Tim, what would you tell him?
I would we talked about this at the beginning, is pull your head up from the sand and get outside of your business, get outside your life, connect with as many great people as possible, and join a mastermind group and receive coaching. The one thing I realized in university getting a business degree is we never talked about networking with people. We never talked about learning from others and, continuous learning. I got out of university and I think I burned all of my textbooks. I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm never going to read a book again. Right. And if only I realized that 2 years later, I'd be reading a few books a month. Right. So if I could give any 20-year-old and certainly 20-year-old Tim any advice, it's to surround yourself with those great people in a mastermind group and in a coaching relationship.
And on the other end of your life, when you get to the end, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered by that quote, somebody that loved unconditionally, served generously, dreamed audaciously, and grew purposefully. I want to be remembered as a man of God that helped his family to strengthen their relationship with God and helped their friends to do the same, and was a positive influence on everyone that he met.
Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
Doug, I'll leave you with that great quote of magnanimity. Strive for greatness by bringing out the greatness in others. And in every interaction that you have, think about what can I learn from that person and how can I add value to them? And that's what true leadership is.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. We've talked about you've added value to me since the day we met, and you added value to me today and everyone that's listened to this podcast as well. So thank you for living by that definition. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug. It's such a pleasure. I value your relationship, and I'm blessed to have you in my life.
Likewise. Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Tim. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/310. And leader, as always, if you want 10 extra growth this year, then I really want to challenge you to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 7 years. And if you're unfamiliar with what they are, they're simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. So if you're interested in learning more about masterminds, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And as always, I like to end with a quote, and I'll quote Rick Warren today. He said this was so good. He said, "Leadership is not about numbers or goals or programs or achievements. Leadership is about love. If you genuinely love people, they'll follow you." So good, Rick. Thank you. Well, leader, I hope this episode added value to your life. Keep leading. Don't quit. The world needs your leadership. Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and we will talk to you next episode.